There's an uncomfortable truth that almost no one dares to tell you. The more you grow, the more you bother others. And it's not because you did something wrong, it's precisely because you started doing something right. People don't sabotage those who are on the same level. They sabotage those who threaten to move up. And if you still believe that effort, kindness, and good intentions are enough to win, you're playing a dangerous game. Because the real world doesn't work that way. As Machiavelli taught, politics guided by reality, not ideals, is the only path for those who truly want to grow. And that means understanding something hard. Not everyone wants to see you succeed. Some just don't want to see you better than them. Perhaps you've already experienced this firsthand. Comments disguised as concern, lack of support when you needed it most, people who disappear when you start to evolve, or worse, who reappear only to pull you back down. And in the midst of all this, you start to wonder, am I the problem? But here's the twist. Maybe the problem isn't you growing. Maybe the problem is that you still don't know how to grow amidst people who don't want you to grow, because the end justifies the means. And if you continue playing fair in a game where others play secretly, you'll always be at a disadvantage. Not for lack of ability, but for lack of strategy. And that's exactly what you're going to learn here. Not how to please, not how to convince, but how to win, even when nobody believes in you, even when they try to stop you, even when the environment seems to be against you. You'll understand how to move unnoticed, how to turn attack into advantage, how to build power without depending on anyone. Better to be feared than loved? Maybe, but more important than that is being impossible to ignore. And when you understand that, something changes. You stop fighting the game and start playing for real. And the question that remains is simple. Are you ready to stop trying to be accepted and start being respected? If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul. An invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He begins to realize it wasn't when he failed that the looks changed. It was when he started to grow. At first it seemed like support, timid praise, that neutral energy of someone who doesn't yet see you as a threat. But as the results appear, something changes in the air, subtle, almost invisible but real. It's the crab bucket in action. When one tries to leave, the others pull back. Not out of conscious malice, but out of discomfort. Growth exposes stagnation, and that bothers them. From then on, comments disguised as concern emerge, jokes with underlying criticism, doubts planted like poisonous seeds. And he begins to understand a hard truth. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. People don't react to what you are, but to what your evolution represents to them. And in this game, as Machiavelli already said, the end justifies the means, even the most subtle emotional means. Over time, he realizes there's an unspoken social contract, an invisible agreement that says, stay at your level, don't rise too high, don't change too much. When someone breaks this silent pact, the group reacts like an immune system. And that's where unconscious strategies come in, excluding, ridiculing, minimizing. He begins to notice that the more he evolves, the more he needs to deal with the need to avoid being hated, not in the sense of pleasing, but of understanding the limits of exposure, Because in this scenario, the appearance of virtue matters more than the naked truth. He learns not to say everything, not to show everything, not to celebrate every victory, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Virtù and fortuna come into play, the ability to act intelligently and know how to read the right moment. A practical example, instead of announcing a new project, he simply executes it silently. Instead of discussing plans, he shows results. This reduces friction, decreases resistance, and maintains control of the game. And that's when he understands something even deeper. The group's attack isn't the problem. It's the symptom. The real game lies in how he reacts. Because reacting emotionally is exactly what the system expects. Arguing, justifying, trying to convince, all of that only fuels the dynamic. This is where the calculated use of force comes in, knowing when to act, and especially when not to act. He begins to develop constant adaptability, adjusting his posture according to the environment. Instead of direct confrontation, he observes. Instead of defending himself, he positions himself with strategic silence. Like a leader who understands that loyal armies aren't built amidst chaos, but outside of it, and without realizing it, he begins to take the first step towards something more powerful, disappearing from the battlefield without leaving the game. He then realizes that remaining present in that field of tension is like throwing gasoline on the fire. The more he responds, the more he fuels it. The more he explains, the more he exposes himself. And it is at this point that a silent, almost counterintuitive turning point occurs. He decides to disappear, not physically, but energetically. He stops reacting, stops justifying himself, stops participating in the game. He becomes a ghost, and this, curiously, has more impact than any direct confrontation, because human beings know how to deal with attack, but they don't know how to deal with absence. When you withdraw, you break the pattern. And as Machiavelli would say, decisions based on real human nature are always more effective than impulsive reactions. The group begins to miss your response, your energy, your role in the conflict. And without realizing it, you cease to be a target and become an enigma. At first, this strategy seems strange. You feel like responding, like putting everyone in their place, like showing who's right. But he learns that it's better to be feared than loved, and at certain times, it's even better to be misunderstood. Because when you become unpredictable, you gain an advantage. He starts applying this practically, silencing notifications, reducing unnecessary interactions, avoiding pointless debates. At work, he only answers the essentials. On social media, he reduces his exposure. In groups, he observes more than he speaks. And the most interesting thing happens. People start projecting things onto him. Does he know something? Is he planning something bigger? Absence creates paranoia, and that's power. Not noisy power, but the kind that's built between the lines. The appearance of virtue, the silence of strategy, and the more he withdraws, the more he notices something uncomfortable. Silence doesn't just reveal others, it reveals himself. Without the external noise, without the constant conflict, he begins to hear himself. And that can be more challenging than any external criticism, because now there are no distractions, no justifications, just him and what he still needs to build. It is at this point that the strategy of emptiness ceases to be merely a defense and begins to become a portal, a space where he is not being attacked, but also not being applauded, a neutral territory. And it is precisely in this emptiness that something new begins to form, something stronger, more independent, harder to strike. As if, by leaving the battlefield, he were being prepared for something greater, something that can only be built away from everyone's gaze. And it is in this silence that the true discomfort begins. Because disappearing from the external game seems liberating at first, but he soon realizes he has entered a new kind of battlefield, a more intimate, more demanding one, where there is no audience. Exile arrives disguised as a choice, but is often imposed by circumstances. Fewer invitations, fewer messages, less validation. And if he's not aware, he may interpret this as rejection, when in fact, it is preparation. As Machiavelli would teach, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires him to see beyond the emotion of the moment. Isolation is not punishment, it is pruning. And all well-done pruning prepares for growth. At this point, he begins to understand that the end justifies the means, including the uncomfortable means that distance him from the noise to force clarity. At first, he tries to fill the void with distractions, social media, series, shallow conversations. But he soon realizes that this only prolongs the discomfort. So he changes his approach. He uses exile as a tool. He begins to structure his routine like someone who is building something great behind the scenes. He wakes up earlier, organizes his day, sets clear goals. If he wants to evolve intellectually, he chooses strategic readings like The Prince by Machiavelli or Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. If he wants to grow financially, he starts studying investments, stocks like Apple, Microsoft, or ETFs like the S&P 500, understanding the long-term game. If he wants to improve his communication, he records videos, practices public speaking, observes great communicators. He understands that virtù and fortuna are not luck. They are preparation finding opportunity. And exile in this scenario becomes a laboratory. Over time, something changes within him. He no longer misses the noise. He begins to value clarity. He no longer seeks approval. He begins to seek precision. And this completely changes the way he moves. He understands that avoiding being hated doesn't mean hiding, but knowing when to show up. That an appearance of virtue may open doors, but substance is what keeps those doors open. And most importantly, he begins to build his own loyal armies, not necessarily people, but skills, knowledge, discipline, resources that no one can take away. And the more he evolves in this isolated space, the more he realizes that he can't simply return to the game in the same way as before. Because now he has something to protect. Something that is not yet ready to be exposed. And that's where a new need arises, learning to move without revealing what is being built. And then he realizes growing up in silence isn't enough, because at some point the world starts watching again. And when that happens, how he presents himself becomes as important as what he's actually building. This is where one of history's most underrated lessons comes in, that of Lucius Brutus. Brutus pretended to be foolish, distracted, irrelevant, while observing everything. He understood that in an environment full of invisible games, appearing harmless was the greatest possible advantage, and that's exactly what he begins to apply. Because, as Machiavelli would say, the appearance of virtue is often worth more than virtue itself. He stops trying to impress. He tones down his outward appearance. He doesn't reveal everything he knows nor everything he plans. And with that, he begins to move freely without arousing resistance. In everyday life, this translates into small, strategic decisions. Instead of showing off his expertise, he asks questions. Instead of confronting weak ideas, he observes those who defend them. Instead of announcing grand plans, he shares only neutral fragments, politics guided by reality, not ideals. He understands that the environment doesn't necessarily reward the most capable, but the most adaptable, and this requires control. Control of the ego, control of speech, control of exposure. A practical example? In a competitive work environment, instead of trying to prove superiority in meetings, he delivers results quietly and lets others underestimate his abilities. This reduces attacks, diminishes envy, and creates space to grow without interference. Better to be feared than loved. But before that, it's even better not to be perceived as a threat until the right moment. But there's an important detail that few realize. Pretending isn't lying, it's strategy. It's understanding that the world doesn't function based on total transparency, but on reading context. Virtu and Fortuna once again. He begins to act with a calculated use of force, showing only what's necessary at the right time to the right person. And this creates a powerful layer of protection. Because while others are busy trying to decipher him, he's already a few steps ahead. Constant adaptability becomes his foundation. He molds himself to the environment without losing his core. And little by little, he begins to perceive patterns in people. Who talks too much, who observes, who influences. And within these patterns, he begins to see something even more interesting. Not everyone in the group is truly united. There's always a breaking point, a weaker link, and that's where the game really starts to change. And it is at this point that he stops seeing the attacks as a problem and begins to see them as raw material. Because until now, he was protecting himself, positioning himself, hiding himself, but now he understands something deeper. Every criticism contains information. Every attack reveals a weakness, a loophole, a point that can be polished. This is where the concept of anti-fragility, developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, comes in. The idea that there are systems that not only resist chaos, but grow with it. And he realizes that he can become exactly that. Instead of reacting emotionally, he analyzes. Instead of defending himself, he extracts data. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Because, in the real game, whoever ignores feedback, even if it comes from enemies, loses the chance to evolve faster than everyone else. In practice, this completely changes his approach. When someone says he's inconsistent, he doesn't argue back. He observes, am I really being inconsistent somewhere? When his communication is criticized, he records himself, analyzes, and improves. When his abilities are doubted, he uses that as fuel to develop specific skills. He begins to study intentionally. Books like Anti-Fragile by Taleb himself or Mindset by Carol Dweck. He invests time in developing competencies that generate real advantage: communication, decision-making, reading human behavior. And little by little, what was once an attack becomes a diagnosis. What was once pressure becomes a stimulus. The end justifies the means, even the uncomfortable means that force growth. But there's a detail here that few can sustain. Using attack as fuel requires emotional maturity, because the ego wants to react. It wants to prove itself. It wants to win in the short term. But it starts playing a different game, a long-term game. It understands that avoiding being hated doesn't mean pleasing others, but knowing how to filter what to absorb and what to ignore. Some criticisms are garbage. Others are gold in disguise, and it's up to it to separate them. Calculated use of force, once again. It absorbs what strengthens and discards what distracts, and the more it does this, the harder it becomes to break. Because now, any attempt at attack only makes it more prepared, more precise, more dangerous, and it's at this moment that something curious begins to happen. The group that previously seemed solid begins to show internal cracks, small conflicts, small disagreements. And it realizes that it doesn't need to attack directly, it just needs to understand where to strike. And then he sees what few perceive. Groups are not solid blocks, they are fragile alliances sustained by momentary interests. On the outside, they seem united. On the inside, they are full of small tensions, silent disputes, and egos competing for space. It is here that he begins to understand, in a practical way, one of the oldest principles of power. Divide and conquer. Not in the aggressive or cheaply manipulative sense, but in the strategic sense of understanding human nature. As Machiavelli would say, decisions based on real human nature always surpass any idealization of perfect unity. Because there is no group where everyone wants exactly the same thing. There is always a weaker link, someone less committed, someone dissatisfied. And he learns to observe this calmly, without haste, without exposure, just collecting signs. In everyday life, this reveals itself in almost imperceptible details. A sideways glance during a conversation, a passive-aggressive comment, an awkward silence when someone is praised. He begins to map these dynamics like a strategist. Who truly leads? Who follows out of convenience? Who is there out of fear? Who is waiting for a better opportunity? Politics guided by reality, not ideals. He understands that he doesn't need to confront the entire group. That would be foolish and exhausting. Instead, he begins to adjust his posture with specific individuals. Sometimes an isolated conversation, sometimes a subtle acknowledgement, sometimes simply distancing himself from certain points of friction. A practical example? In a professional environment where a group criticizes him, he identifies who is merely going with the flow and begins to discreetly build bridges with that person, not to manipulate, but to neutralize resistance. And this, little by little, changes the balance of the game. But the most important point here is that he doesn't force division, he reveals division. He doesn't create conflict. He allows it to appear, calculated use of force, because when you push too hard, you become the villain. But when you observe, understand, and act with precision, you become invisible in the process. The appearance of virtue remains intact. And while others begin to question each other, he remains stable, predictable, reliable on the surface, and a strategist inside. Virtù and fortuna again, the ability to act at the right moment with the right intensity. And as these small fissures grow, the group that once seemed like a wall begins to fragment, and he realizes something even more powerful. When the opposition weakens internally, he no longer needs to defeat anyone directly. He only needs to keep advancing until his own evolution becomes the greatest possible answer. And it is at this point that he understands something that completely changes the game. True revenge is not retaliation, it's transcendence. Because deep down, any attempt at direct confrontation still keeps him trapped at the same emotional level as those who tried to drag him down. And he no longer plays that game. He begins to realize that the only truly powerful response is to build a life so solid, so well structured, that the opinions of others simply lose relevance, not out of arrogance, but out of practical irrelevance. As Machiavelli would say, the end justifies the means, and the end here is not winning an argument, but conquering his own journey. He stops wanting to show something to someone specific and starts focusing on something much bigger. Freedom. Freedom of choice, of movement, of thought. And that changes everything. In practice, this translates into concrete decisions. He begins to seriously organize his financial life, building savings, investing intelligently, thinking long-term. He seeks income sources that don't depend on validation from others. This could be a digital business, service provision, or consistent investments. He understands that autonomy isn't just talk, it's structure. And at the same time, he works on his emotional side. He stops constantly seeking approval, reduces the need to be understood by everyone. Avoiding being hated ceases to be a priority. The focus now is on not being dependent. A simple example? Before, he needed someone to recognize his effort. Now, he measures his progress using his own metrics: discipline, consistency, real evolution. He reads, applies, and tests. He learns from references like The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, where true revenge isn't destruction, it's silent ascension. And little by little, something inevitable happens. As he rises, the past becomes small. The voices that once seemed so loud now sound distant, almost unreal, and he realizes he no longer needs to answer, explain, or prove anything, because the result itself speaks for itself. The appearance of virtue remains, but now sustained by real substance. Virtù and fortuna align. Preparation meets opportunity. And the most curious thing is that those who previously doubted begin to observe from afar. Some with curiosity, others with discomfort. And he understands that this is part of it. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, because in the real world, people don't respect those who argue best. They respect those who build best. And it is at this moment that he begins to perceive something even deeper. Perhaps it was never about defeating others. Perhaps it's about fully accepting the journey, including the difficult parts, as an essential part of one's own greatness. And this is where he takes an even deeper step, perhaps the most difficult of all, because until now he has learned to react better, to position himself, to grow, but now he needs to change the way he sees everything that has happened. Not as an obstacle, but as an essential part of the journey. This is the principle of amor fati, popularized by Friedrich Nietzsche, to love one's own destiny exactly as it is. Not to wish it were easier, fairer, faster, but to accept, and more than that, to use each difficulty as fuel. Because ultimately, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands this: to stop fighting against what happened and start using what happened. He understands that every criticism, every exclusion, every moment of doubt was raw material, and the end justifies the means, even the means that, at the beginning, seemed unjust. In daily life, this completely changes his energy. He stops asking himself, "Why did this happen to me?" and starts asking, "How does this strengthen me?" It seems simple, but it changes everything. Because now he no longer wastes time resisting the past. He uses it. A practical example: if he was discredited, he uses that as motivation to become unquestionable. If he was excluded, he uses that to develop autonomy. If he was criticized, he uses that to refine his execution. He begins to see patterns. All pressure generates adaptation. All pain reveals latent strength. And he begins to study this intentionally, reading Stoic philosophy like Marcus Aurelius, practicing reflective writing, constantly analyzing his own reactions. Virtù and fortuna again, the ability to transform circumstance into advantage. Constant adaptability ceases to be reaction and becomes identity. But the most powerful point is that he stops seeing enemies as enemies. He begins to see them as part of the process, not in the sense of passively accepting everything, but of understanding the role each one played in his evolution. Calculated use of force is still present, but now with a more stable emotional base. He doesn't react with anger, he reacts with clarity, and this makes him much harder to destabilize, because when you fully accept the game, you are no longer controlled by it. Avoiding being hated ceases to be a concern because he no longer depends on it. The appearance of virtue continues to be used when necessary, but now effortlessly, naturally. And it is in this state that he realizes something crucial. When you no longer fight against the path, you start walking faster. And this inevitably leads to a new level, where it's no longer about surviving or growing, but about becoming completely independent of any external structure. And then he reaches a point where everything begins to solidify, not as theory, but as real structure. Because up until now he has learned to protect himself, to evolve, to adapt, but now he understands that none of this is sustainable if dependence still exists. Emotional, financial, intellectual dependence. Any of them can be used against him. And that is why autonomy becomes the new objective, not as a luxury, but as a strategic necessity. As Machiavelli would say, one's own loyal armies are the basis of any lasting power. And in this context, his armies are his skills, his income, his mental clarity. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Because in the real world, those who depend too much negotiate poorly, and those who negotiate poorly lose freedom. In practice, he begins to structure his life in a solid way. Financially, he seeks multiple sources of income. It could be an online service, consistent investments, building digital assets. He learns about cash flow, emergency reserves, and diversification. He doesn't depend on a single source. Emotionally, he works on his stability. He no longer reacts to every stimulus, doesn't need constant validation, and isn't easily shaken by external opinions. And intellectually, he develops independent thinking. He stops accepting everything as truth, begins to question, study, and form his own conclusions. A direct example. Instead of blindly following financial advice, he studies fundamentals, understands companies, and analyzes risks. Instead of passively consuming content, he filters, applies, and tests it. Virtù and fortuna come into play again. Continuous preparation to seize real opportunities. Constant adaptability becomes his operating standard. And over time, something powerful happens. The leverage others have over him simply disappears. No one can pressure him anymore with fear, scarcity, or approval. Because he has built a foundation, calculated use of force remains, but now with even more precision, he chooses where to be, with whom to be, when to act. Avoiding being hated ceases to be relevant because he no longer needs to negotiate his space. The appearance of virtue is still used when strategic, but now it comes with real independence, and this completely changes how he is perceived. Not as someone who needs, but as someone who chooses. And it is at this point that the game changes completely. Because, inevitably, those who previously underestimated him begin to reappear, with new intentions, new narratives, trying to rewrite the past. And he realizes that the ultimate test is not growing up. It's knowing how to deal with them when they return. And then it happens. What deep down he always knew would happen. The same people who doubted, criticized, or simply disappeared begin to reappear. Some with curiosity, others with admiration, others pretending they were always there. And this is the most delicate moment of all. Because it's no longer about growing, it's about maintaining what has been built. The game changes again. Now there is no more direct attack, but a silent attempt at rapprochement. And here lies one of the biggest traps, the desire to accept everything, to show that you don't hold a grudge, to reopen doors without criteria. But he understands that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires discernment. Not every return is genuine. Not every approach is loyalty. And as Machiavelli would teach, avoiding being hated doesn't mean being accessible to everyone. It means knowing exactly who deserves access. In practice, this requires standards. Clear, firm, non-negotiable standards. He begins to observe behavior, not words. Who was truly present when there was nothing to gain? Who respected his silence? Who didn't try to drag him down? And most importantly, who also evolved? Because real growth changes people. He understands that he can't treat everyone the same way just because he's now in a better position. Calculated use of force manifests here as access control. A direct example, people who previously criticized now want closeness. He doesn't reject them aggressively, but he also doesn't immediately open up space. He maintains a strategic distance. He talks, observes, tests. Virtu and fortuna, acting wisely at the right moment. The appearance of virtue is maintained. He remains polite, respectful, but without naivete. And it is at this point that he realizes something definitive. True power lies not in conquering space, but in deciding who occupies that space with you. Because now he has something he didn't have before, choice. And choice demands responsibility. The end justifies the means, and the means now are selection, filtering, positioning. He no longer needs to prove anything, nor convince anyone. He simply maintains the standard, and that in itself communicates everything. His own loyal armies remain his base. People, yes, but mainly principles. And the more he sustains this, the more he realizes that he has won not only externally, but internally. And in the silence of this conquest, a new stage emerges. No longer about survival strategy, but about how to communicate all this in a way that others can also break free from the same cycle. Now let me ask you, in all honesty, how many times have you diminished yourself just to avoid bothering anyone? How many times have you frozen, retreated, or doubted yourself because you realized the environment wasn't ready for your growth? The truth is, no one will give you permission to evolve. And if you keep waiting for acceptance to act, you'll spend your whole life stuck at a level that no longer belongs to you. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. The game has always been happening. The only difference is that now you can see it. So what are you going to do with this? Are you going to keep explaining your plans to those who don't support you? Or are you going to start executing them quietly? Are you going to keep reacting to every criticism? Or are you going to transform that into fuel? Are you going to keep depending on the approval of others? Or are you going to build your true autonomy? Because in the end justifies the means, and the means are your daily choices. Small decisions that, accumulated, build a life that no one can control anymore. And this doesn't happen with motivation. It happens with positioning. Now the decision is yours. Do you want to remain just another person in the bucket, or the one who understands the game and gets out of it? Comment below which point resonated with you the most. I want to know how deeply it affected you. And if you truly want to continue evolving, understanding human behavior, strategy, and power, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what you've seen here is just the beginning. The rest requires you to be willing to go deeper.